If you're wondering why this particular podcast is starting off in the middle, it's because part one was last week. So you might want to stop here and go back to the previous week's edition of our podcast of Living the Wildlife to get part one of our interview with Dr. Quinn of the University of California. Otherwise, if you've listened previously, get ready for the rest of our interview, which is another 45 minutes. We had to break it up into two parts. So hang in there. The best is yet to come. Thanks for listening. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here.
January is over, so I have a little bit of a respite and we'll try and get that sorted. But then the plan is to do a pilot field study where we let it go in a legal application, and then we try and trace it through multiple trophic levels by the collection of feces and using hair snares in this kind of area. And so for over a year, we'll basically be picking up roadkill, feces, deploying hair snares, and trying to figure out what's going. So it's really exciting, but it's also very exhausting.
Yeah, no, I think it's because it's, you have to find all that stuff, and then you're hoping that you find the right ones so you can get a positive hit. Otherwise, because theoretically, you might not get anything.
Yeah, that's just science, though.
That's the way it is. So that's
yeah.
Wow. So your advice, the takeaway for our audience ultimately is that to the extent possible, we want to reduce our use of anticoagulant rodenticides or rodenticides, period, if we're trying to reduce it getting out into the nature.
Not really. What I'm saying is that if we can reduce the amount of rats that are exposed to anticoagulant rodenticide, that's different than reducing the amount of anticoagulant rodenticide. We need complete rodent management. Right now, in a lot of places, what's happening, and like I keep saying, people are too focused on what's happening inside the bait station. They're not looking at what's happening outside the bait station. So what you're getting is essentially like these big, massive curves of, there's your rat population, your PMP comes in, they do a good job, but they don't do a good job over a long enough period of time. So the rat populations, they rebound, the PMP comes back 3 months later, does a good job, same thinking. And it's the same cycle over and over again. So the system's just shooting out all these poison rats. Right. However, if you get to a system where you do a good job and you keep it down here, instead of jumping all the way back up here, all you're doing is shooting out now way less rats. Now, there's ways to do that, that could involve just, you're talking about, I think, is that you need to think outside the box. And I physically mean the actual box.
Right.
Sometimes you have to think about trapping, where you're trapping, what baits you're using. Anticoagulant rodenticides are the easiest to use, but there are other options. And obviously the other options will also decrease the amount of rats. But if they don't decrease them to a good, to the threshold that you want, well, you're probably going to come around and use anticoagulants again. So you have to think about your program. You have to think about reducing conducive conditions. And I just think that that's hard. I don't think it's the PMP's job to clean up. I think it's unfair that a lot of people are like, oh, these guys are just spray jockeys, or these guys and girls are spray jockeys, they just want to put the bait out. And I was like, it's not their job to clean up people's yard. If you're in my yard and you're a rat, you don't get a chance to live too long, because I'm like, do you know who I am? I'm like, seriously, what do you think you're doing in here? But Stephen, I have an orange tree. I have, we have avocados. We have, I'm here in Southern California. We're so spoiled. Cherimoya, we have peach trees, and we just put in a fig tree. I just put in 2 new vines. What am I thinking? Vines in my own backyard where I know that there are rats, but I want passion fruit in my yard because we're in Southern California. Yeah. We have blueberries, blackberries, raspberries. We have it all. When the tomatoes come in, that's when all full scale war goes out. But I trap off the ground on my fence every time for roof rats, 100% off the ground every time. And that means as well that I don't have to worry about non-targets. Didn't kill one single bird all last year, and I lost 3 tomatoes from about 15 tomato plants.
Wow. So yeah, and I think this is the challenge, because what you're asking is right now the model in pest control is quarterly visits, maybe monthly visits, and they're basically trying to poison their way to success. And part of that is the customers aren't willing to pay the price. And I do think part of it is that sometimes when you're in business, you get into a rut, you're making money. Why screw with the model? Right. And so I do talk to pest controllers, and I say, part of the reason why customers don't adopt exclusion and some changes, because I tell well, is that the PCO doesn't believe it. Customers know when you're talking to them whether you believe in a system or whether you don't believe in it. So they feel it. And so I'm not a salesman, but I know that there are times when I was poo-pooing something, the client was turned off by it. When I was gung-ho for something, the client was like, oh, okay, I guess we'll do it. So our confidence level, plus we're disincentivized, because a client will say, well, I don't see any more rats here, I need to fire you. And so I don't know how to get out how this is why I'm a little, I don't know how IPM, is it a sustainable business model for a PCO in some ways? Now, wildlife control operators, if people follow our directions, they'll never see us again. It's not quite the same for PCOs, right? So how do we change that? And I've been thinking about that for a while. How do we create that culture? Because right now, governments just tend to ban stuff, and they have a very heavy hand, and it's not delineated out, right? So just, all right, these are bad toxicants, we're going to ban these toxicants or highly restrict them for only certain circumstances, and we're hoping that's going to bring us the promised land. And I'm going to be waiting to see how that plays out, because you're obviously seeing difascinone. Clearly that's going to be going up. I'm a little surprised you're not seeing chlorofascinone. I'm a little, my reading is that it has some second gen characteristics to it. So
well, I think it's a little bit to do with what they're eating, and then a little bit to do with what's being applied. So like in agricultural systems, so like production agricultural systems, we'd seen way more chlorofascinone, but we're not looking at exposure to those coyotes. And so I think
right.
it changes a bit. And so Roger Baldwin out of UC Davis, we're looking at like a bigger spread across the state and what's exposed like in more of an ag setting, because ag is next. Like people shouldn't be under any impression that the first gens are protected too, because the first gens, and like I'm working, so I'm part of the reevaluation process with DPR, and so we're actually testing best management practices for commensal rodent management, but it's horrendously complicated. And so we're collaring rats, we're looking at how long it takes them to die, but we're also looking at their activity across 3 months to see because the one thing I always say, and like people don't get it, is that, I always say so Stephen, what happens to your grass when you mow your lawn?
Grows back.
Did you mow your lawn wrong?
No, I use the same analogy. I say, people say trapping doesn't work, and I'll say, well, why do you cut your grass?
Exactly.
That doesn't work either.
Exactly. And so I think that people think that people say success is different things. Now, obviously the callback is not ideal, but exclusion is very, very important and also very, very profitable. And so we've actually in California realized that so I'm involved in the West Coast Rodent Academy, and we have workshops twice a year. And we've actually kind of changed with the time. So we thought, oh, it'd be great to get this workshop certified, it'll be very valuable. But we decided that because things change so much in California, that we shouldn't certify it, and we should allow the workshop to be more flexible. And so what we do now is we actually take a whole portion of the day and we dedicate it to exclusion. And so we have all these boxes with pipes and all these door sweeps with little systems where there's gaps under doors.
Yeah.
And we have a section where we talk literally about almost like hardware cloth. And it sounds ridiculous, but there's so many tools and so many different things, and and I'm not into construction, but I tell you, I know more about American houses than I ever did. But all the different glues and different exclusion materials. And we break our groups out into 3. and we have 3 stations where people can, learn how to use expandable foam,
Okay.
learn how to, use tin snips and be neat, because that's the thing, is that like one of the things in California that we know is that like you have to guarantee your work. Well, you don't have to, but like if you want to be a company that
Right.
works in
Right.
exclusion, you need to guarantee your work, because there has to be some value in it for the customer. And so you can see that there's like these companies that have just moved towards like offering exclusion, doing it really, really well. And what that does is it limits your callbacks, especially to places where people are more concerned about rats in their home as opposed to rats in their yard. But
Right.
because there's always rats in the yard, there is opportunity for like an added service onto your exclusion there. And so I think that, it's a mistake. And I also think that sanitation would be like, I think one of the things that we're really lucky at my office, well, my old office, this is my new office here, but my old office is, we have like these things called demonstration landscapes. And so my boss, his job is all about water quality and conservation, and so he's done a couple of things, including pesticide related research. We're looking at runoff and how
Hmm.
pesticide gets in, and he looks at like different types of landscapes in California and how much water they use, but also like how those landscapes could contribute to pesticide runoff for like ant treatments or things like that. And so I have these homes at our facility. So when we have the West Coast Run Academy, we have people create inspections. But what my boss didn't know was, he didn't know that he was making landscapes with overhanging branches and like vegetation right up to the walls.
Right.
And like, so
Right.
there's opportunities for PMPs to have these added services. And I don't know if the big companies or maybe the small companies are a little bit more equipped for this kind of stuff, but like there's loads of money to be made in, hey, look, this here is over here. We could change this, we could do this. It would be
Yeah.
really like, it's a winner
I
for both of us.
Yeah, I agree that there's money to be made. The challenge is we have two things. One is that in my limited experience in this, it tends to be the people willing to pay for those services is usually the top higher end in society.
Yeah.
And then you have to deal with the general conservatism, and I don't mean that in the political sense. I just mean that the if something works, don't mess with it. Conservative, just the trying to maintain the status quo. That there's a hesitancy to adopt a new model of business for people. It takes time. You have the early adopters and people, and certainly in wildlife control, maybe less so in pest control, but in wildlife control, we're very reticent to try new things simply because the consequences of failure are so high. And just now, I mean, I've been talking about one-way doors as years ago, and people will say, "Well, I tried it once, and the squirrel chewed through the wall on me somewhere else." And yeah, that can certainly happen, but that was a very negative experience for that person, and that turned them off. Only in the last several years am I starting to see more people adopting one-way doors, from ground animals and things like this. So people are beginning to become more comfortable. So it's a very slow process. How do we do that for businesses that tend to be low ballers? They tend to go in the lower end of the market. They're like, the reason why the person's hired is that they're going to poison their way to Shangri-La. The slumlord's not going to fix the building because there's no money there to fix it in the first place. And otherwise you have people living in rat infested locations. It is, it works for the people willing to pay the dough for it. But what do we do about those lower classes?
And I think you're dead right, Stephen, because, with all the pesticide legislation in California, there is a social justice issue with
Mm,
limiting cheaper pesticides for
right.
people. And so at the VPC a few years ago, I kind of looked at the the communities in California that had local ordinances, right? And so, with preemption and all that kind of stuff, you can't really say you can't use pesticide, but they can say you can't use pesticide in on city properties,
Right.
right? So
Right.
I looked at all those cities in California, and like I kind of commend them for trying to do something, but
Right.
obviously if you don't understand how it's broken, you can't fix it. And
Right.
so I think that what they're doing is, they're trying to do the right thing, but they're not going to succeed, because it just doesn't work like that. And so I looked at those, and I looked at the median income of those cities, and almost all of them, I think it was 85% of them, were above the median income of above the median income of the normal median income for the United States or for California. I can't remember
Okay.
exactly. I'm sure I did California. The other thing is that some of them were 265% above the median
Oh yeah,
income. So
yeah.
basically what you have is you have these rich people driving legislation on something that actually disproportionately affects them,
That's right.
because probably lower socioeconomic classes are more heavily impacted by rodents than on the other end of the spectrum. So it's
Absolutely.
really,
Absolutely.
really, really unfair. And like the
Yeah.
one thing we know about anticoagulant rodenticides is that they're cheap and they're easy to use. Now, are
Yes.
they better or worse than everything else? I couldn't tell you. And I think it's funny that people are like, take like birth control. People are like, there is no evidence that anticoagulant rodenticide reduces density, or that birth control reduces density of rats. I can't find a paper that shows that second generation anticoagulant rodenticide reduces density for rats in urban environments either.
Oh, interesting.
Right? There's the research on commensal rodent research is just not there. When you look at applied management, or like even like adaptive management of like a population of pests, there's tons, and I mean tons of like different papers looking at IPM, like, and especially like Roger Baldwin's done great work on squirrels and
Hmm.
gophers, and there's loads of work in the Western United States on squirrel and gopher management, and some that you've been involved in too, Stephen, and it's great. But like, if you think of like IPM and proof that IPM works for commensal rodents, I can't find it. It's either never been done, it's never been tried. I couldn't tell you that anticoagulant is better than traps, or traps is better than an acute rodenticide, or that a mix of all of those is the best way to go, because it's just never been done. And I think it's
Interesting.
never been done because A, there's not enough rodentologists in the United States, and B, it's too flipping hard. Like, it's so difficult to research a heavily managed system.
Interesting. I'm a little surprised by that because I would just think anecdotally, uh, I think it's worked for me in terms, anecdotally from my own property,
But
uh,
what did you measure your success on?
on the number of rodents that were around anymore.
So,
So
like, were you using a game camera? Were you
yeah, no, I
checking
didn't
it?
have. It was just simply were we having any issues? So I would, close gaps and just making sure that rodents weren't penetrating my house. But no, it wasn't scientific. That's why I said it's anecdotal. It's just sort of
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah,
it kind of it fits.
it's not that I don't think it doesn't work. I just think that, like, from what we're seeing is that, like, we see this, like, I think what's happening is we're just skimming off the top, right? So you have this population of rodents, say like this is your population of rodents, this pen, and we
Yeah.
take off about this much. And what happens is that this much is below the threshold of visibility. So
Right.
like they're there, but they're not as visible. So you don't think it's as bad. Now I couldn't tell you that for a fact, but I think with these, we know how prolific they breed.
Yep.
And so if you leave 3 or 4 months in between your service, like, the one thing that I have to say, Stephen, that I'm trying to get across to PMPs is that if there's nothing in your bait station, you can't kill a rat. And so if you have no bait or a trap
Right.
that's been engaged, it's never going to kill anything. And so when people say, oh, Dr. Quinn says use less rodenticide, no. If it's going to increase the amount of rats that you manage, use more rodenticides,
Right. Right.
right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah,
if
I
you
hear
have
you.
nothing in there, all that's doing is you're making more rats and more rats and more rats, and then you
Right.
have to kill them anyway.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
it's very complex, really, really
So,
complex.
with and this is the other challenge, even if one house does everything correctly, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can reduce their use of either traps or rodenticide because they don't know. They may be the vacuum that the neighbor who's overproducing where everything's moving towards.
Yeah,
If they have their bird feeder out and they didn't modify it and they have lots of food over there, you're going to be the sink for everything to move towards because they're going to be moving out. So it's, yeah, I'm fascinated by your rodent academy too. Are you going to be doing any video work? Are you going to be filming any of those sessions at this rodent academy?
so the because of the way things are right now, the Rodent Academy is virtual, and so this will be our second virtual Rodent Academy, and it's on March 3rd and 4th, I believe.
And what does it cost?
It's $99 for association members. So if you're a member of your association, but if you're not a member of your local association, it's $129. And we have credits for, so far we've gotten credits for, like, obviously California, Arizona, Washington, Idaho, Oregon. I think we're trying to look for Hawaii as well. I was kind of surprised, usually we have an in-person event and on purpose, we limit the amount of people that can attend.
Right.
So there's generally just space for 45 people, and we don't usually advertise. We've never had to, and we've had people from all across the United States at this stage. And we felt that a virtual Rodent Academy wasn't the same experience, but we felt that because of what's happening in California, it was important to make sure that our PMPs had all the information on everything, including what's happening with AB 1788, but also like all the alternatives to second generation anticoagulant rodenticides.
Yeah.
So like how the acute works, information on trapping and exclusion and all that kind of stuff as well. And also like all this new technology that's coming through and how that can work as well. And so we had to, and the first one was really successful. We had like 300 people attend, which was incredible. And what's really good about the West Coast Rodent Academy, I mean, I think it's great, obviously, but like it's a kind of a feedback loop where any profit we make goes straight back into my program, and I use it for research that I bring back to the West Coast Rodent Academy. And so we haven't really gone global because, there's great rodent academies in Texas and New Orleans and, New York, and, they're trying to start one in Oregon. We're also trying to help with the one in Washington as well. But like, we feel like we have great information and it's coming straight from the horse's mouth, essentially, because what's coming for California is probably coming for like the most conservative states that are even out there. That like pesticide legislation never changes. I am telling you that once some university starts to look for it, they will find it because it's definitely there. And I think that, look at South Carolina, for example, look at Kiwa Island and look what's happening there with their bobcats. And when I talk to the people that are helping with this Kiwa Island thing, they were like, oh, it's illegal exposure. And I was like, well, why are the bobcats eating? Are the bobcats even eating roof rats? And because if they're not even eating roof rats, well, then, maybe it's nothing to do with the pest management professionals, but maybe something else is getting into the bait. And, there's like the thing that we found is that you can actually, even though we didn't have any non-targets or very limited non-targets in the bait, you can almost completely eliminate the chance that they'll even get to the bait station by elevating it. And so if you're in roof rat territory, why not elevate it? It makes no difference to how they find the bait station or if they will enter it. And as we've already discussed, sometimes they don't enter the bait station. And it doesn't make a difference whether it's on the ground or off the ground. What it does make a difference is the chance that your wildlife will interact with it. But I've got a really great video from one of our last studies of, like, essentially all I can call is like a raccoon rave, where we have these big 4 or 5 fat raccoons. And like, I always thought raccoons were smart, but these things, they must be dumb Egypts, because all they do all day is roll around with the bait station. But for me, it's got really great value because it just goes to show the value of a very secured bait station. And whether or not when we use non-toxic baits, we always follow like the rules. So like we anchor them, we make sure they're like less than 50 feet away from an occupied structure or whatever, whatever the current rules are. Like, we want to try and replicate those. And we also, like I said, we want to try and make it practical. But like the raccoons, like they tried, Stephen, like the hands were in, they were almost rolling around with them, and the bait never came out. And I think that that's just such a win for pest control. That shows that like this device, even though I'm not sure it works really well for rat management, it does exactly what it's supposed to do as well, which is exclude non-targets. Like the only reason
you're going to patent it?
No.
Why?
It's just someone else. It's just someone else's bait station. It's just someone else's bait station. I mean, but it worked. It did exactly, because we are using bait stations because we don't want non-targets to get the food, not because we think it's the best way to manage rats, right? So,
So I think I'm going to have to sign up for your rodent academy. I'll have to look. We don't have any association in Montana, so I can't join an association that doesn't exist. I've been begging them to form one, but people usually don't listen to me, so I don't have to worry about that. So I will definitely look into that because I'm intrigued with how you're doing some of those hands-on classes. I'd like to see how if I could incorporate that here in my work for my other job, not my
well, you'll
wildlife
have to
control job.
wait till we have the in-person class, because I think the in-person class is, it's just hugely valuable. And what I like is that there's a lot of peer education, and I think that the Road Academy isn't just me, some scientist getting up and being like blah blah blah, science, science,
Right,
science.
right.
That's just useless for. I mean, I'm not saying that pest management professionals don't like the science, but like, we get people that are in the industry and have been in the industry for years and years and years, and they have lots of experience in the field of what works and what doesn't work. And some of it may be scientifically based, some of it may not be, but like, these are the tools we have and the information we have. And so,
Sure.
and I
Yeah.
like as well that sometimes we have people that have been in the job for 3 weeks, and people that have been in the job, I think 45 years was the longest people, and they still, like, everybody learns something.
Oh
And so
yeah,
that feels great
absolutely.
for
No,
me.
I'd
Yeah.
I'd still like to visit the. I mean, I'd love to come to the physical meeting when all this craziness goes away, and as well as, but I'd like to even see the video, the remote version as well. So I think we'll be in touch about that. Any final words before we close up? We've been talking here for almost an hour and a half. So
Well,
how
well,
would
that's
you
it's
anything you want to
it's in
close off before I finish
it's
off the show here?
it's in the genes,
Sure.
Stephen.
No,
I
this
can't
is
I can't help myself.
no, this is
I just
fine. We got to you're letting you talk because this is important information for our PCOs and wildlife control operators to think about. How are we going about our work and what's the impact? Because we say we want to protect health and property and the environment, and then are we fulfilling our goal? And we should be constantly reevaluating ourselves. And it's painful because we have some sacred cows in our industries, and we get beat up a lot for things sometimes inappropriately, and we get defensive and we're going to hunker down rather than saying, okay, how can we improve ourselves to achieve the goal? And some of these are political questions, some of these are scientific questions where we definitely need to be self-reflective and realize, that how do we resolve this? Maybe moving to first gen will help. It may not cure the problem, but maybe it will help reduce some of the negative impacts that we would have on wildlife because the half-life is so much less than the second gens. But
Yeah, and we just don't know. And
we
like,
don't
the
know.
thing that I think is important to know, Stephen, is that the target is on the PMP's back.
Yeah.
It's there. It's already there. No matter what state you're in, the target is on your back. And I think that I would be of the opinion that no state is properly prepared for
No, we're not.
the S storm that is coming their way, and it will come. And if you look now, you can see all these groups popping up, these NGOs that they mean very well and they have a very good cause, and no wildlife should be falling out of the sky exposed to pesticide. That's not
Right.
supposed to kill them. That's
Yeah.
not supposed to. But like, we don't know the answers to the questions. And if California doesn't know the answers to the questions, and we have the most information, and we're in the middle of, like, essentially a moratorium on the use of second gens, imagine what's going to happen in all the other states. Like, it'll just be gone like that, and
Yeah.
there's no
We,
leg to stand on. And I think that, and I love NPMA, but I tell them all the time, I was like, where's the chair of rodentology in the United States? No, I don't want to be it, but like, I'm just saying, like, where is it? We have 50 million chairs of entomology, but where's the chair of rodentology?
right.
Where are the rodentologists of the future? Because I don't know where they
Well,
are, and
we'll
I'm
look at
definitely not going to survive right?
vertebrate pest control is the orphan child
Yeah.
of pest control, right? I mean, I tell when I give talks, I mean, this is one of my soapboxes, and that is, look, I tell people, don't go into vertebrate control. There's no money in it. There's no real future in it. You want to go bugs and weeds, bugs and weeds. And I just keep repeating that. It's bugs and weeds, bugs and weeds. That's if you want to have a career, if you want to have a good life, bugs and weeds, because there's money there. Everyone loves you. You're not getting hated. And then when they take away one pesticide, another pesticide's in the tube coming. That's not the case for vertebrate control. Yeah, it's sexy to be in vertebrate control. You're dealing with wildlife, and yeah, you can look like you're a cowboy out there or whatever. But the reality is there's no love for us. We are basically the Pied Piper, right? Everyone loves us at the moment. But as soon as the problem's gone, we're like, "Who are you again? We don't know who you are. What are you doing? What are you doing? You kill animals? Why are you killing animals?" And so, I like, and I have nowhere near the science work that you have, of course. But I mean, how many vertebrate pest specialists are there in the country in academia?
Not enough, I'll tell you
No,
that
it's
much.
because there's no love for it. Well, I think what's particularly goading by some of these NGOs is the way they market their work. Oh, we just need more owls, as if owls are going to solve the problem. And we just need to understand that we need to be in this sort of mythical harmony with nature. And I'm like, and I harmony, or I mean, nature can kill us. So what
Well,
harmony are you talking about?
I
And
think we're
so
living in that right now, right?
so this is it. Nature can kill us, right? And so either we are, I did my dissertation on this subject, right? And so it's dominion over wildlife, that, and with a question mark. And so I did my dissertation on this because this is profoundly philosophical and theological, in my opinion. And so they have this mantra, and people believe it because the people they're talking to are in their wealthy houses with highly manicured environments, and they have the money to do a lot of quote unquote non-toxic things, and therefore everything's fine. And they don't
I
realize how much control is sometimes going around them. It's what happened with a hazing study, and I was wondering if you were going to talk about it in Denver. There was a hazing study in Denver done by the HSUS. I was sitting next to a trapper who was, while the lady was talking, saying, "Oh, I trapped a coyote there, I trapped a coyote over there," and she's claiming how great this hazing program worked. He was killing the coyotes outside the city limits that were likely causing some of the problems that those coyotes were having. And he was like, "Yeah, I killed the coyote there, killed the coyote." Now, she didn't know that. She was completely ignorant of that fact. But she
And I
was
think that there's a huge disconnect. I think that everybody means well. I think the people that kill rats are doing their job because they believe that rats shouldn't be in the environment, they cause disease.
right.
And I believe that the people on, like, let's say the other end of the spectrum, that like the people that Raptors a solution, poison free Malibu, like I believe that what they're doing is they're trying to like protect wildlife. And I don't think
Sure.
that's bad either. And
It's
so
not
like
bad.
I think that there's with wildlife management, it's the same with politics. There's an absence of middle. And I think if there was more middle, we'd actually get a lot further than if there was, very, very left, or like, I'm just here to kill the rats. But like I believe that rodenticide is very, very important, but it doesn't belong in wildlife. Now,
Right.
it's not that simple, as you said. So like, I think that I'm not really sure what the answer is, but like owls are not, like, our selected species cannot be controlled by any predator. And so we know that, and that includes rats and owls.
Right.
There's some research out of UC Davis now that looks at the use of owls and like raptor perches and things like that. And it looks at, in some situations in ag, that they can work. And by work, I mean
Help.
they can reduce the
Right.
population.
And I
However,
would think, because if you can make it a predator sink, it could work, right? And so,
yeah,
but that's the challenge. And I appreciate what you said about the middle ground, and I think this is, but I would want us to be careful what's called the academic fallacy. And the academic fallacy is when you have two extremes, the truth is in the middle. And I'm saying no. And I use the analogy of, okay, well, let's take a look at two different political extremes. We have Hitler style fascism versus American style democracy. What's the middle? We only kill half the Jews and only some of the homosexuals and Jehovah Witnesses, or do we kill, so is that the middle ground? So sometimes the truth is more polarized, and maybe things are closer to one end of the spectrum rather than quote unquote in the middle. So I'd want us to be very careful of what we call the what I call the academic fallacy. It was just like we just split it in the middle. That's going to be the
Yeah.
truth. No.
But
I'm not arguing that at all.
and we can't do that because I don't believe that you should ban anticoagulant
Right.
rodenticides at
No, I
all. But
appreciate that.
and I also don't believe that they should be in wildlife. But the thing about them being in wildlife, and this kind of talks about the middle as well, is that we don't even know if they have an impact, like a population level impact. So
Right. Right.
they're in coyotes in Southern California, but are they even having a sublethal effect? And if they're not having a sublethal effect, well then
So
I hesitate to say so what, but like it's technically like
so let me
does it
ask.
matter
So
what
let
they're
me
in
ask
there?
this question. It's not the perfect answer, but there was some research on modifying bait stations. And I know your research showed there was very little non-target entry, but that clearly says there were some. Um, you're near, Silicon Valley and all that kind of stuff. Why can't we have some bait stations that evaluate the size and weight of the animal entering and simply allowing the bait to be available or not available based on the sensors of the animal walking in?
Well, I think you could do that, or you could just put it up in a tree, which would cost you way less money
Well,
and solve the
certainly,
problem
but
too.
but remember, but I would say there's more to the world for those of us not in California.
Exactly.
We don't have
Yeah,
roof
that's
rats.
true.
I would love to trap a roof rat. I have not caught a roof rat yet. I'm looking forward to it someday. But we do have non-targets
Yeah.
entering our animals, our bait stations, and so this would be an interesting way of resolving that more in a national wide area. And I think we're not doing, I would like to see it. I don't believe technology solves it all. I think we need to have more aggressive training of our PCOs on what they should and should not be doing in terms of the decision-making process. But I would like to see some advancements within the bait station technology itself, even the sliding door concept that I had, because there are guys they're only there for mice, and yet they're killing squirrels are getting in there and chipmunks, and they're not there for chipmunks, and they're just there for mice, and they're killing all kinds of stuff. I've had people tell me that. So, oh yeah, I see squirrels going into my bait stations all the time.
We need more money and more researchers. And I think that any kind of mammal research is so expensive
Yeah, it is.
because it's a lot of time and a lot of effort to be able to get the amount of animals that you need to show any kind of variation. And so, like, we've been really lucky. We got funded by NPMA, which has in the past funded very little vertebrate research.
Yeah.
And we got funded by our structural pest control board in California, which had never funded any vertebrate pest control research. The same with DPR. And so we were actually on a roll for a while, but now I'm at the stage now where I've got too many eggs. I don't even know what to do with them. Like the chicken is long gone. So we're like, but like it'll come to there's always questions. And like for me, it's, I'd love to start doing like more kind of very basic. Most of my research has to be applied, right? That's the nature of our positions. But I would like to know more about like the bait stations and where to put them and like styles of bait stations. And is one better than the other? Now, I don't want to pit the manufacturers against each other, but like my job in the end is to make sure that rodent management is more efficient for the people that use it, as in the PMP, and the people that need it, as in the customers. And so, like, I think that there's loads of opportunity out there. It's just time. And in California, there are 3 of us. Roger Baldwin works on ag issues. So I'm not saying that he doesn't do rats, but it's mostly ag.
Right.
We have a new person, thank God, a new person, and Carolyn Whitesell, and she works mainly on predator interactions with livestock and stuff like that in kind of open space areas in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And then there's me, who basically gets all the really weird crap that happens in Southern California. And it's just not like California is a country of 65 million people. Every day is a human wildlife interaction. Every day is a vertebrate pest management issue. And there's just not enough of it. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. Working with Roger in some of his ag sites, like I think if the general public in California knew how many rats were crawling all over their lemons, like they'd be horrified. Like, I mean, I'm never like just completely and utterly disgusted. Like my parents come to visit from Ireland, and like we don't have the rat pressure in Ireland that we have here in Southern California, or even in the US in general. Like the first time I went to New York was to the New York Rodent Academy, to Bobby Cargan's. I was disgusted.
It's amazing.
I couldn't
Absolutely
believe that
amazing.
Irish people would spend €500 to buy a ticket to come to the most rat infested place I'd ever been in my whole entire life.
Yes.
Anyway, so my mother comes, and now my mother loves the sun. I mean, she's a freckly white Irish woman, like you've never
Yeah.
seen anything like it in her whole life. But she's afraid almost to go out into the garden because the rats will get her. You know what I mean? Like, because I mean, it's just like people don't understand. Like I understand,
Yeah.
but like even like when I'm managing rats, people are like, well, why would you put them off the ground? And I was like, well, why wouldn't you put them off the ground? Sure, that's where the rats spend all the time. But so, and then people are like, but nobody tells you that. Like nobody knows. And I was uh, like we realize I have rats at my own desk,
Yeah.
Stephen, of course.
There you go.
And like we realized early on in the process of the West Coast Rodent Academy, that our PMPs in California were getting confused about what they were actually managing. Like
Hmm.
what's a mouse and what's a juvenile roof rat?
Right.
Or what's a juvenile Norway rat and an adult, like these are two different species but similar size.
Yeah.
And so like which one's which, and so like we actually got this really great relationship with Cal State Long Beach, and they have this amazing collection, and so we call it rodent speed dating. And we
Nice.
do it at the West Coast Rodent Academy, where we look at scat, we look at all the native rodents, we look at the commensal rodents, we look at the difference, because people just don't know. And like if
Right.
you don't know, you can't do. And so like I
I
think,
agree.
like you said about education is so important, but like we can't educate on best management if we just don't know what it is. And then we
Right.
also, once we find out what it is and then someone changes it or restricts a pesticide, then we have to change it all again. And
That's
it's just
correct.
so difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to go on greater principles and then just try to work our way through. But I'm glad to hear the MPMA put some money out there. I would love to see other associations be doing some research now. I'm thinking of one that I'm just not going to name at the moment that they should be spending some money. But there's a lack of. Everyone thinks universities are flush with cash, and they don't realize all the money is going to administration. So that's a little dig I'd throw out there for the people that, because we are wasting a lot of money on administration. And so, but in any event, there is a need for this type of work. I I don't know how in we have to, I think, adopt more citizen type science as well, which is one of the things Master Gardener does. And so, in community, and Master Naturalist, I think, is another avenue that we should be using as well. But I do think there are some things that we have to do. Really appreciate your time here today with us. We're going to chat some. I'm going to be corresponding with you a little bit privately when I get back to my office here to talk to you about this Rodent Academy and some other things to catch up on. I came across a product that I'll probably send you a little piece of. It's called rat tape. And it's from the UK. It's not here in the US yet. And so I figure if you're going to do this Rodent Academy, maybe you guys would want to play with it a little bit. So maybe I should ship it to you and have you get your. I'm going to probably keep some of it because I wanted to play with it myself. But maybe get your opinion on what it is, and I'd like to maybe see it come to the U.S. to
Cool.
if people like it. So we'll be in touch about that. So, well, everyone, we've had a really what's called a mega edition of the living the wildlife here as a part of the Pest Geek podcast. We hope you're hanging on. But maybe we'll divide this up into two shows and have it a two-parter. But if you want to correspond with me, definitely reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Take a few moments, subscribe to the channel, send me an email, tell me what you like and what you don't like about the show. And always remember, we want you to live the wildlife. We don't want you to be the wildlife. Take care, everyone.